was here. I can see some other teacherly figures. Now that we can't see each other all the time in this mode, and people, as Preetham was pointing out, often go behind, their display pictures. But I think I can recognize a couple of teacherly faces there. So thank you so much for coming as well. And Dr. Goswami, of course, is the mother of a former dear student of mine who's doing wonderfully. She studied history at St. Stephen's with us. And yes, and she is doing something very interesting, which people would not expect historians to do. But that's what I'm here to talk to you about how with history you can do almost everything that there is to do, really. So I haven't spoken for such a long time ever before, except probably at the Indian Institute not the Indian Institute, the Lal Bahadur Shastri Institute for training bureaucrats, where there is often a class as large as 300 to 400 students, which is very intimidating. But all of you are my friends, and even though your numbers are steadily increasing, which is a wonderful thing, I will step in with the assurance that I am among friends, and therefore sort of let my guard down a little. And I'll ask you to indulge me in case the 90-minute period becomes a little too much for me to take. I'll hold your hand and allow you to guide me, including, of course, Preetham, who's there and who's very kindly agreed to help me. Thank you so much, Preetham, for those wonderful words, but I don't think I deserve all that. There was one more thing I wanted to tell you, that this is a very difficult time, and I'm grateful that you have turned up in spite of all the pressures and the stresses that such a time imposes. I think historically we have never experienced anything like this before. It's truly unprecedented. And just like everybody else, we historians are also trying to struggle to understand what kind of period we are living in. I don't think we are anywhere close to any answers yet. But one of the things that has immediately sort of been of concern to us is how inadequate this mode of virtual interaction is. We really miss being with our students in in-person classes where we can talk to them, mingle with them, share their joys and pains, and learn together. You see, that intimacy that comes from a classroom situation, from the constant interaction that we have with each other, is something that we sorely miss. I'm sure that's true of all your teachers, of all of you as well. Students usually have a love-hate relationship with schools. They don't know what to make of it, whether they like it or they don't like it. But if there was ever an extended period of time where you became nostalgic about your school, I think this is one of those. Because you realized how much important it was to just be with each other, with friends, with teachers. But one of the good things that has come out of this is these long-distance virtual interactions. Although we had video conferencing apps with us before, but lazy as we tend to be, human societies, we were not really trying out the full potential of this very, very important technology. It is because we were forced into this by the pandemic that eventually we had to give in. And now, of course, this has been the way in which we are subsisting. The entire education system, in fact, is now running mostly on online mode. So even though that might be the case, that we have come to this in a period of stress and out of pressure, I think we have discovered grudgingly the fact that it allows us to meet with people so far away from us and to call in all kinds of friends who have things to share with us. As a teacher, I feel that it allows me to expand my class. And so at the moment, I have a class of 60 and 20 at St. Stephen's College. Now, suddenly with all of you, I have another 50 or 60. And that's a wonderful opportunity. And that is something I feel that I and all of us should take from here and never let go of this. So even when we might go back to the regular rhythms of teaching, learning as they are done in normal times, we should probably continue using this technology to reach out to different parts of the world call in people who would otherwise not have been amongst us, and then try and share whatever we have with each other. So with that said, recognizing this is a period of difficulty as well as opportunity, let me launch into the topic of the day, which is why should we learn history? Now, as a long-time student of history, now teacher, also a kind of historian, I discover new meanings to that question every day. New answers come to my mind every day. And so I can't claim to have reached the end of that question. And I can't be claiming to give you the final word on what and why we should learn history. In fact, this is a conversation that I want to have with you so that I can learn yet more new ways that one can understand history and reasons why one can do history, right? In a way, like all other major subjects, history is something that is constantly with us. We are never, ever living in a vacuum. We always know where we have come from. And the moment that happens, we know history. All of us live with some sense of where we have come from. You know what happened yesterday, you know what happened last week, you know what happened last year, and you know what has happened since you were born and grew up to be the kind of people that you are. For those of us who are older, we constantly know what it is that we have experienced in our life before this moment. So history is imbuing our lives with a sense of purpose and a sense of knowledge all the time, every time. It suffuses each and every aspect, in some senses, of our being. In whatever things we do, little, more, small, big, there is a context of what has happened before. But that's a very general sense of history, what has happened in the past. Here I've come to talk a little more about the discipline of history, something that we have created as a kind of organized study of history, and which is imparted to you in school, and which you then take up in colleges, and then perhaps hold on to beyond this. And how that is something that is of importance to all of us, right? So before I go into that question, as why should we learn history, I think we need to know what is history. Because to some extent, our answer to the question of why we should learn history depends on our ability to be able to define history in a certain kind of way. How we define history will determine what we make use of history for, or what we think history should be learned for. So let me start off by putting this question to you, because I always do this with my students in my class. And every time I do this, I learn so much more about what people think about history or what they think is history. So if you have paper and pen or pencil, then just jot down, say, 5 things that come to your mind when you think of the word history. So you needn't write out a full sentence or a small paragraph or a note, but just tuck, 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 tuck. You see flowers, sunshine, rivers, ice creams, and friends. So think of 5 things that come to your mind when you think of the word history. Yes, Preetam, you were saying something.
How much time do they have for that activity? Oh, you're muted. Don't mute yourself. You keep yourself unmuted all the time. Yeah.
3 to 4 minutes. I think that should not take very long, or 5 minutes probably.
No. 5 minutes too long. I think they should get max 2 minutes. Otherwise they'll go slow.
Yeah. So 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, 2-3 minutes.
5 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But don't write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that'll be an easy way out. Think hard. So 2-3 minutes are very short for thinking very hard. But if you do quality thinking, I think you can get there. Just 5 things. that you think about when you think of history? So usually what happens is that when I do this in class, my students excitedly write 5, sometimes 10 words. And then at the end of the day, I tell them that none of what they have written, nothing of what they have written is actually useful. That all of that is bunkum. But I won't do that for you. Because in their case, I do that in order to challenge them a little more. College students, unlike school students, are very lazy. All of you are not lazy. You are very active students of Loyola, and you are inspired by the teachings of Ignatius Loyola, one of whose primary contributions to, to human experience was discipline and hard work. That is how Ignatius Loyola actually distinguished himself. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But I'm sure all of you Loyolans will think like Ignatius Loyola and will actually give us 5 concrete, important, useful, interesting, funny, perhaps naughty answers. Answers that will make us think and rethink what we often take for granted as being history. Ah, I know history, everybody says. What is there to know about in history? Doesn't everybody know history?
APD, check my chat.
Huh. Yes. But that is also one of my strategies, to disturb people when they think. So my friend Preetam suggested that I leave you in silence while you are writing. So I'm telling him now that that's one of my strategies. I want to see how many of you, come up with aces, 5 aces. There are hardly 5 aces in a pack of cards. There are only 4. But I know that you'll come up with 5 aces, even while I have been disturbing you as you write. So that done, I will take Preetham's word and I'll give you a minute of silence. So, are we done? Let's see some hands. Who would want to go first? Whoever thinks that their 5 words for history are the most irreverent, please come forward and share your 5 words with us.
I think Priyanka wants to say something.
Priyanka.
So I have written first is kings.
Kings, wow.
Yes.
Oh.
And invaders.
Ooh.
Temples.
Yes.
And freedom fighters.
Lovely. And the fifth one?
Freedom fighters.
Okay, so freedom is one and fighter is one. Excellent. You tricked me a little, but you've got your 5 words. Thanks, Priyanka. So Priyanka has given us very interesting words. Kings, invaders, temples, and freedom fighters. These are all very, very big history people and things. History is always full of these people.
I think Srishti is dying to speak. Srishti.
Shrishti, yes.
Sir, mainly I thought I had to describe, that's why I made 5 points, but then I realized that we have to give 5 words. So exactly, I wrote ancient ruler was the first point, then
Lovely.
famous dynasties,
Mhm.
social workers,
Okay.
and invaders. I wrote 2 invaders, and then one was I was thinking of potteries, weavers, accessories of past.
So what Shrishti has done is, she has, of course, mentioned rulers like Priyanka mentioned kings. She's also mentioned invaders like Priyanka mentioned invaders, but she's also deflected the whole thing a little. And she has spoken about social workers. And she has spoken about craftsmen and artisans. She has said weavers and basket makers and so on and so forth. So she has brought in some elements that are not as dramatic and as glorious sounding as some of the things that both Priyanka and Shrishti have pointed out. And that's a very important pointer about how one can think somewhat differently on the same question and how different things come to mind when the same word is put to you. There's somebody else.
Abhirup is dying to speak.
Abhirup, my friend. Mr. Matthew, I must tell you that I turned up a little before Pritam, and Abhirup was there to host me.
Okay.
And in 5 minutes, he has told me all the secrets about your school.
Okay. That's great.
Abhirup, welcome, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. History tells us about the past, and we know about the kingdoms, kings, and the lifestyle of the kings.
Past, kingdom, kings.
And
Yes.
their lifestyle.
Lifestyle, right?
And then we come to know about the world wars and revolution, various revolutions.
Wars and revolutions.
And all the
Civilizations.
Yes, sir.
So as you can see,
And
history, sorry. Yeah,
and
please.
we also learn about the early men.
Early men, yes.
Yes.
So here is Abhirup, who's pulling us further into the drama of history. So he's brought in the wars. He's brought in nothing less than revolutions. Everything that turns everything upside down. One can say that we are now in the middle of an epidemiological revolution, this pandemic. The world has been turned upside down. Wonderful. And then he also went off the track a little. He was going into wars, revolutions, into all these very excited affairs. And then suddenly he said, early men. And he took us back to a very, very early, simple times when this kind of a world, which has wars and revolutions, could not even have been imagined. Very early, rudimentary times, to the simplest of the phases of humankind's existence. Wonderful. Thank you, Abhirup. Anybody else would like to chip in?
Piyush wants to go, then Konkan Jyoti. Piyush first, please. He raised his hand earlier.
Yes, sir. So I have written Hitler, Mahatma Gandhi, and King Gilgamesh. So King Gilgamesh and the period of God, sir, era of God. And some Swadeshi movement also came since in first unit test we had some chapters, so it came to my mind.
Right. Thank you so much, Piyush. So what Piyush has done is that he has peopled our story with figures, Hitler, Gandhi, Gilgamesh. These are important figures. These are faces to the story about kings and rulers, etc., etc. These are larger than life world historical figures as they have been identified. So wonderful. So there are names now. We have some names. We have figures, particular persons. Excellent. Then there was somebody else.
Konkon Jyoti.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Kangan, please.
I have written the point number 1, civilizations.
Yes.
Then point number 2, ancient coins.
Coins.
Ancient coins.
Yes.
Okay.
3 number, biographies and autobiographies.
Mhm.
4, life of kings.
Right.
And number 5, the type of system of governance.
Okay. So again, Kangan Jyoti has opened another window into the room called history. And what has he said? He has said something very, very specifically. He said, no, not modern coin, ancient coins. He knows that modern coins are worthless. Today, all the money that you have can go kaput. And you might suddenly discover that all of that is worth nothing. Demonetization. Anyway, so this is better. Ancient coins. So he knows where to put his eggs, in which basket. Excellent. And in the same vein, he has mentioned biographies. Coins, biographies seem like two very different things. One can get you some money. The other you will read, but with great reluctance. Mama will say, read, 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 read Gandhi's biography. Then on the 10th day, you will pick it up and read. Two very, very different things, but there's one very common factor between them. And what is that? The factor common to them is that both of them are what is called sources. Historians write the history on the basis of evidence, sources that they find, writings of ancient people, their coins, their buildings, their footprints. Like we have carbon footprints today, there are historical footprints. And these are there in documents, in coins, in architecture, temples. Priyanka had pointed out right at the beginning. So he has pointed at a very important element of history, which is sources. Sometimes when there are no sources, there cannot be any history. So that's a very, very important thing, Kangan Jyoti. Thank you so much. Now we'll take one or two more and then we can go on to some more discussion.
Any more hands? We're getting
Kangan
such
Jyoti was
wonderful
wanting to add something.
Who's that?
Was Kangan Jyoti wanting to add something to what he said?
Konkon, you want to add something? Is that why you put on your video? You're welcome.
So if I may just interrupt a little, I really like the background that Mr. Matthew has. You see, it's a very historical background. It's amazing. Just have a look, because it's kind of, the effect that I want to create that words will not allow me to. As if something is going on at the background, something is taking you in, something is, flowing out. This is the ebb and flow of history. And it's very gently happening, the long duration of flows of time. Just look at what is behind your principle and just keep that in your mind when we do this talk about history.
And that is why you need, and that is why you need to come and visit me in Norway, because I'll take you to see that, the Northern Lights.
And yes, and I must say there's something else that happened. Is that, pardon me, Mr. Matthew, but you actually went in and out of it.
Yes, yes.
So you see, historians will do that. We will see how that happens, how people can go in and out, and that is really, I must say that metaphorically and, analogically, this is absolutely the right setting. I wish we could have all of that expanded and become a common sort of background to the entire Zoom screen. But I think, Preetam, we might not be able to do it. So we'll, for the moment, just stay with that. I know that Preetam is an ace technology person when it comes to all this, but he can't get us that. I know.
No, no.
So anyway.
Sir, you can call me Leslie.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. You were not there when we started.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay. So is there anybody else who would want to come in, or should we start? Priyanka, should we continue?
Yeah, looks like.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All
Sir,
right.
I would like to add some point.
Oh, very good.
Yes, Srishti.
So, sir, it was exactly the question that what things comes to your mind when you read of history or know the word. So, I would not like to describe history in a word, but I find history to be more inspiring in many ways, such as when we get to know or study about ancient rulers, their lifestyle, their works, how they contributed to their kingdom. I feel like those stories which we read now may inspire many individuals and youths, such as when we study about the works of many kings, just like King Ashoka or queens like Cleopatra. It inspires us many ways. So I find history to be more inspiring.
Yes, very good. I think that's a very important point. And one of the things that my students also feel over generations, actually, now that I've been teaching for quite some time, is that they get inspired by it, but somewhat differently, as I will come to it, somewhat differently than how you said people get inspired. But that's also a very important kind of inspiration. So let me now, much as I would love to talk to you a little more and get to your 5 points, I think we'll have to do the kind of regular thing as well and just go a little back to the grid that I thought might stand us in good stead as we go along, right? So with your permission, I will just share something with you. Here it is. Briefly. So what is history? And I'm very bad at all this, but I just thought that I'll throw these things at you. And I'll throw these things at me also and see what happens. And so if you find that this doesn't quite sort of fit in and answer your questions or satisfy you, just bear with me and indulge me for a while. So when we think about history, there are many definitions that come to mind. And you have already spoken about it in your own way. You have told me what you think about history. Now let us look at it a little more systematically, as one would do within a course of study. What is history? One very simple definition of history is that it is equal to the past. Whatever has happened in the past is history. So you will often find people say things like, oh, that is history. Oh, you are history, right? Meaning that you are finished, basically. Or, why don't you, so that is history. Don't talk about that, talk about the present or something like that. So here what happens is that they are combining or conflating history with the past itself. Whatever has happened in the past is history. All the events, all the people, every experience that human beings have had in thousands and thousands of years of their existence is all, or can be all referred to as history. But history is somewhat different for historians and teachers of history from history equals past. History is actually a memory of the past. It is a thought. It's about thinking about the past. So when you think about what is your history, then that thought is what becomes history, right? Some reflection on the past, some attempt to make sense of what has happened. The moment what has happened goes through a process of thinking and you become conscious of it, it comprises or comes to comprise memory, a kind of mental, sometimes written record of the past, a sense of the past, a thought about the past. And that is what is perhaps more properly history. And that is how history is different from the past. So it's a memory of the past and not past itself. And there can be all kinds of memory. There can be personal memory, there can be institutional memory, there can be community memory, Now, of course, we are all under the thrall of what we can call national memory. We all think of ourselves within national memory. These are many kinds of memories. You can think about other kinds of memory. You can think of women's memories. You can think about workers' memories. As Shrishti was pointing out, you can think about weavers' memories. Weavers' memories are very different from national memory, are very different from institutional memories. You can think about memories of children. Children might have a memory about childhood, or adults might have a memory about childhood, right? You can have a memory about friends. There can be a history of friends. You can just think about friends. Whatever you like, you can make a memory of all that. In fact, we do often remember things that we like. Especially in these days of the pandemic, you will find that so much of negativity around us that often as a refuge, as a sanctuary, we think about nice things. One of the things that I do, because I spent 2 years in Shimla before, and of course, a few months with Preetam in Shimla long back, but 2 years more recently before the pandemic, because I'm so stressed out in the pandemic, I keep thinking about Shimla. So good things. So you can think about travel. There can be a history of travel and so on and so forth. So once you begin to think about something that has happened in the past, you create a memory in one of the pockets of your mind, many pockets of your mind. You can have many different kinds of memories at the same time. You can have a memory of yourself as living in Assam. You can have a memory of yourself as a student at Loyola. You can have a memory of yourself as someone who traveled to Shimla. And you can keep all those memories here in your mind. These are the pockets that you have over here. And all of these things constitute some kind of history. This is the history that is really meaningful because you always live with this. Everything you do is informed by this. The moment you go to school, all of that comes back. All the institutional memory about your school comes back. The moment you're meeting a friend of yours, all the memory about all your friends and that specific friend comes back. You untap, you open up that box, and you bring out that little bit of memory and you use it at that time. Very subconsciously. You might even not know that you're doing it, but you do it all the time. The moment you write for an examination, an entrance examination or something, your family history will come back. My grandfather was this, somebody else was that. I have to do this, I have to do that. Whatever you do, you tap into these memory pockets in your mind and you bring out those memories. That is your history, or those are your histories. And those are the real histories that you're constantly living with. You can't escape from those histories. Only a vegetable escapes from those histories. I'm not even sure. I think these days people are saying that animals and plants also have memory, have historical memory. They're sentient beings like all of us. So I think this is very important. And this is all the time with you. But we in the schools and colleges where we study and where we teach and we learn, think of history again somewhat differently. We don't think about it in terms of history equals to past. We don't even think about it as history equals to memory. We think about history as a discipline of study. It is of course related to history as a past. It is related to history as memory of the past, but it also becomes somewhat different when we are studying history as a discipline. Now, what happens to history when we think about history as a discipline? So let me now get you to this. Discipline of study. This is a bit of history that we have to do, but I'll sort of pass over it quickly so that we can go to the more interesting things. So history as we know it today, as a discipline that is taught in schools and colleges and universities, started in the 15th century in Italy, in a period called the Renaissance. And I'm sure some of you who are in the higher classes will study a little about the Renaissance. That history took shape over about 500 or so years and came right into our own time in the late 20th century. Some of that history is still practiced today. In fact, it is perhaps the lion's share of history that is done in schools and colleges and universities, although things are changing, which is why I'm not giving it all the space that it often claims it has. So this history developed in the 15th century in Europe, and then it gradually got shaped into a certain kind of study, and then got organized into institutions and into courses and curriculums, and got tested through examinations, and then got frozen into a degree, MA in history, PhD in history, BA in history, and all these other things. So that is the story of the discipline of history. Interestingly, the discipline of history is only a certain kind of history. And what certain kind of history that is? It is a history that is about nations and states. All of you are familiar with these terms, nations and states. We belong to the Indian nation. One of you had pointed out, history is the study of governments, and we have a government that is the state. So most of this history that developed from the 15th to the 20th century was essentially a story about the emergence and growth of nations and states. So nations are collectives of people, like Indians. We are all Indians, and that way we are a nation. And then we represent ourselves at the highest level through a state, the Indian government. So the Indian nation and the Indian state are more or less the same kinds of connected entities. And most of this disciplinary history is actually the history of nations and states. But apart from that, it is also these other things. And here I think we can do some interaction. So one of the things, just note these four things down: linear, singular, universal, and rational. And then we will shift this big PowerPoint presentation off the screen, and we will just stand face to face, right? So just write these four things out. This history, this disciplinary history, which developed from the 15th to the 20th century, and is essentially the history of nations and states, is a linear history. I'll explain that to you. A singular history, it is universal history, and it is rational history. Okay, so just write these words down. It will not take long. This is one short of the 5 words that I asked you to write for history. So what I've already done is I've reduced your work to from 5 to 4. So rather than think of 5 words, I did the easy thing. I thought of just 4 words. But that is also to help you reduce the number of words that you have. So, and we will see how meaningful these are, right? So if you have written these down, I will stop sharing. Yes.
APD?
Yes, yes.
One party student is saying, can't hear you properly. He's increased his volume, he's gone to a quieter place. I wonder,
Okay.
others, if they're hearing properly, or you could increase your volume a bit, your speech volume.
Sure.
No, your own speech volume.
Yes, yes, I'll do that.
Speak a little louder. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So are the others being able to hear me? Priyanka, Shrishti, Piyush, Abhiru?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. So what are these 4 things
Yes,
that I have? Yeah, these 4 things that I have given to you. These are actually descriptions of the nature of this disciplinary history. It is about nations and it is about states, but it is also all these other things. These are how it operates. So it's the story of the Indian nation, for example, and the story of the Indian state, but it works through a set of principles or mantras. You know, so all of you have some principles by which you live. So you can say that, well, you will make sure that you listen to your parents. That is one of the principles that some of you follow. Of course, this is also one of the principles that most of you don't follow, but nevertheless, it is a principle. You will follow your teachers. So that's another principle. Similarly, there are these 4 principles on which this history of the nation and the state work. And what are these 4 principles? That history has to be linear. What do you mean by linear? Can anyone tell me? What does the word linear come from? Let me give you a hint. The word linear comes from or is related to the word line. You know a line, you draw a line, right? So the word linear comes from there, line. Yes, Shrishti, you were saying something.
So I think we will get to know in a single manner.
Yes, yes, you're right. So linear, this, when I say this history is linear, what it means is that it moves in one straight line.
Hello.
And how does this straight line move? Does it move in a vacuum? No. It moves from one point to another point to another point. And what are these points? The first point is past, the second point is present, and the third point is future. Exactly. So this is something that historical time moves in. Historical time moves from the past to the present to the future, right? This is absolutely necessary for it. Can you think about other ways in which time moves? Just think about it for half a second, half a minute, 30 seconds. Think about what other ways in which time moves if it does not move in a line from the past to the present to the future.
So sometimes, like, if an event is something is happening in the future, we try to connect the reason of it happening to the past. So whatever we have done in the past, that somehow reflects, and that's why we need to
Yes,
go back sometimes.
yes. So we constantly keep going back. So time doesn't always flow from one to the other to the other. For example, suppose you have a friend a very close and dear friend who goes away, who travels to another place, and you might not see her for a very long time or forever. Now, from time to time, you will think about that friend, right? And when you think about that time, how will you move? Will you move always from the past to the present to the future? Or will you move from the present to the past, as Priyanka pointed out, right? You will move from the present to the past, right? So time now is moving backwards. Then think about day and night. What happens in day and night? After day you have night, after night you have day, again after day you have night. So how is time moving? Is it moving forward or is it moving in circles?
Sir, in circles.
Yes, time is moving in circles. Then you have heard about biblical time. What happens? In biblical times, there will be a day of judgment and there will be apocalypse, right? And then there will be the deluge, and once again there will be generation. So once again time is cyclical, right? Have you heard about the idea of the pralay? In Hindu mythology, you have the idea of the pralay. You have the idea of several yugas or phases. Finally, you will have what is called the Kali Yuga. The Kali Yuga is the time when the sins of human beings, you must have all heard of Kali Yuga, will go to a point where it will become unsustainable. And then once again, there will be a deluge or a pralay. And once that pralay wipes everything out, there will be regeneration. So once again, there is a cycle. Then you have heard about, have you heard about the Swarga, the Nark and Prithvi? The Swarga is the time of gods and they live somewhere there. Then Prithvi is the time of human beings. And then there is a Nark or a Patal, the underworld where other people live, right? So what happens here? Time is vertical. Time is spatial. Upper deck, like in a train compartment, is Swarga. Then there is Earth or Prithvi, and then there is the underworld or Patal, right? So as you can see, there are so many different kinds of time, but history never recognizes any such time. The only time that it recognizes is the time that moves from the past to the present to the future, right? Interesting, right? Right? You had not noticed it, but this is how it happens. So have you heard of tribal peoples? There are lots of tribal peoples in Assam also. They are our friends. We might be tribal, like for example, I'm in Chhattisgarh, and there are many of us who are tribals. So we tribal peoples are supposed to have got left behind. We are tribal because people feel that we are backward, and people feel that we need to be developed. We need to be taken forward. Somehow, if we wear what we wear traditionally, if we eat what we eat traditionally, if we live in our old natural lodgings, then we are considered as being backward, right? We are supposed to give those things up in order to become modern. And only then, in some ways, will we be accepted within the nation as fully equal to everybody else. So there is a constant attempt to develop the tribal peoples, to develop all of us. So we belong, according to history, to those ancient times, relics. We are actually out of place in this world. And we will become equal citizens only if we give up our tribalness and we become like everybody else. Very interesting. History actually needs the tribal people to hold one end of the line so that we, the modern people, can be on the other end. Very, very interesting and very, very interested. In fact, it creates the idea of a backward people from another time in order to show how we are modern and we live in the present. Very, very problematic. There is a big, big problem because of this. A large number of us just get relegated, our lifestyles, our cultures, our foods, our clothing, all of those things get relegated to a past time, which all of us have left behind. And only when we leave these things and become modern will we become proper citizens of this world. So historical time is linear. That is something that is very important. History does not accept the biblical story or the story of the Pralaya and the Yugas or the tribal peoples and their stories as legitimate historical stories. When I was doing my research with tribal peoples and talking to them, they would sometimes start talking to me about their ancestors. So they would start speaking about how once their ancestor was going through a deep forest, and there he was suddenly confronted by a tiger. Sorry.
I'll mute everyone. Okay, Aditya,
Yeah.
you have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So once when I was talking to a tribal person among whom I was carrying out research, he started telling me about the story of this ancestor who met or faced a tiger while going through a dense jungle. And because he confronted him and eventually defeated the tiger in a duel, he was recognized within his community as a leader. And thereafter he became a chieftain of that tribe and therefore came to acquire a very important position. While talking to me, this person who was telling me the story about his ancestor would sometimes replace himself with his ancestor. And he would start talking about the encounter with the tiger as if he was also there and he was the one who was actually fighting the tiger. And I would say, wait. So were you there or was your ancestor there? And then he would say, oh, well, okay, no, my ancestor. But this would happen all the time. Continuously, I found that he was referring to his ancestors and himself as substitutes. So often he would become part of the story of his ancestors. Sometimes his ancestors would also in reverse become part of the story of his own life. So once again, you see how time was not always moving from the present to from the past to the present to the future, but actually moving in very, very confusing ways. History does not recognize this. Disciplinary history only accepts linear time, time that moves from the past to the present to the future. Now, what is the second word that I gave you?
Singular.
Singular, yeah. What does singular mean? Singular means that it is the story of the nation and the state. So it might be your story also, but you are secondary. It might be her story also, but she's also secondary. It might be my story also, but I am secondary. First and foremost, it is the story of kings. Many of you said the kings, rulers, invaders, Hitler, Gandhi, big figures. Okay? So it is the story of the nation and the state, whether it is the German nation, whether it is the Indian nation, and so on and so forth, right? We are there, but we are always secondary. You will often find that in a history book, which is dealing with, for example, the history of the freedom struggle, somewhere there will be a short note on what the women were doing at that time. So women in the freedom struggle, or workers in the freedom struggle, or people from the Northeast in the freedom struggle, or people from Chhattisgarh, where I am from, in the freedom struggle. We will be these small subheadings in a story which is essentially about the state and the nation. So our stories, Shrishti's story, Priyanka's story, Piyush's story, Pritam sir's story, my story, Leslie sir's story, all of our stories get folded into the story of the nation and the state. And only one important character remains. And that is the character around whom all the history rotates, revolves, etc. And that is the history of nation and the history of state. What is the third word that I gave you?
Universal.
Yeah. So what is the meaning of universal? So everybody has the same history. So if you are talking about the people in Brazil, or you're talking about the people in Russia, people in Jharkhand, in Chhattisgarh, in Tamil Nadu, in the northeast of India, in Assam, in Kashmir, in England, all their stories are the stories of nations and of states. So when you meet an Englishman, you're traveling in a plane, and along with you an Englishman is traveling, and you start talking to each other about history. And that Englishman or Englishwoman will tell you about her kings, her queens, her wars, her events, just as you will talk about your kings, your Gandhi, your Nehru, your rulers, etc. So you will find that there will be a certain commonality of themes that you're talking to, universal. Anywhere you go, you will find the same themes and the same history. All disciplinary history is interconnected. So it's very easy for me to go and do my PhD in America, because everybody in American historical academic setup understands what I'm talking about. It's very easy for somebody from America to come and speak to me, because we know that there will be some commonality of themes. It's very easy for me to come and speak to Priyanka and to Abhirup and to Avinash and to Prince and to Simardeep and to Akshpreet, because I know that all of you will understand at least a little bit of what I'm saying, because our themes are common, our stories are common. Just as you know that when I come and speak to you about history, oh, what will Aditya sir say? Surely he will say something that I know. So I will not be entirely at sea. I will not entirely sort of shut myself up. Once in a while, he will say something like Cleopatra or Hitler or something. And I will like wake up and say, I understand that name. Gandhi. Gandhi will come all the time. Invaders, freedom struggle. Something he will say that will be common to what I think. And therefore, it will be easy for me to relate to what he's saying. So history is also universal, this disciplinary history. And the fourth word is rational. So history deals with rational things. It has to be about rational things. It must be done rationally also. So there are causes and effects. So once what happened is that the Santhal tribal peoples of present-day Jharkhand, what is today the state of Jharkhand, you're all familiar with that, were fighting with the British, say in the late 19th century. And they rebelled quite extensively across the entire forest areas of Jharkhand. But the British army was very powerful, as we know, and it defeated all these tribal peoples. And all these tribal peoples were put into jail, and then all of them, like British law always does, were tried one after the other and sentenced for rebellion. When they were being asked as to why they rebelled, so this was an important question. So the judge would often ask them, why did you rebel? Just as the judge asked Gandhi. You know that once when Gandhi had gone to do one of his satyagrahas in Bihar, the police arrested him. And when Gandhi was brought before the judge, and the judge started inquiring into what had happened, the first thing he asked Gandhi was, what did you do? And then Gandhi went into a long speech about how he had come to defend the right of the local farmers and how he would then fight for their rights against the British. Now, in this case, the tribal people said something else. What Gandhi was saying made sense to the British people. They might not have agreed with him when Gandhi said, you are taxing them, you are exploiting them, that's why they are rebelling. The British did not agree with them. They wanted to continue taxing them, they wanted to continue exploiting them, but they understood what Gandhi was saying. But here, the tribal people, when they were faced with the judge in 19th century Jharkhand, after their rebellion had been defeated by the British, when they were asked why they had rebelled, they said, we rebelled because our God asked us to rebel. I think one of you, I'm not very sure, but was it Abhiru or was it Piyush? Piyush had said that history is also about gods. He talked about Gilgamesh and all that, and then he came to gods. So this tribal person said that, well, I rebelled because my God asked me to rebel. Now, this is something that the British judge could not accept. This is what historians will also never accept. The historian need rational causes. They want causes that are devoid of gods, spirits, the occults, magic, sorcery, witchcraft, all these worlds of the spirit. Even your own world as a person who's faithful to a certain religion, like you might be a Hindu or you might be a Christian, and you work because of divine guidance, because of divine supervision, because of divine help and divine faith. All these things history does not understand. You will never see a statement like the following when you are looking at the Indian freedom struggle. That Indian freedom struggle succeeded because the Indian gods helped the Indian people. History will never accept gods as intervening in the lives of human beings. Okay, so history has to be rational. So this disciplinary history is linear, it is singular, it is universal, and it is rational. And it is the story of the nation and the state, right? So think about what if you were to be parachuted down into a fast moving car in the middle of the night and very high up in the mountains. You don't know where the car is coming from, where the car is going, how deep the gorge is, who else is sitting in the car, etc., etc. But you are somehow parachuted straight into that car and you have to experience that car moving, right? So if history is about finding your bearings in that car in the middle of the night, up in the hills, when you don't know where the road is coming from and where the road is going, then it is the nation and the state that take control of the car. It is the nation and the state that sit in the car, that switch on the light, that study the map and get the GPS and find out where they're coming from, where they're going, right? And how deep the gorge is, how long it will take, everything that is to be found out about where one is going. That is what history does. History gives you direction. You know you're coming from there. You're coming from the freedom struggle, so now you want to build a nation. You are coming out of a depression, so you have to build an economy. So history gives you direction. But interestingly, this car is controlled by the nation and it is controlled by the nation state. All of us are sitting in it, but we can't decide where we are going, what we will do, and so on and so forth. It is the driver, the nation state, that actually decides what is going to happen. And it decides this through these many different things like linearity, rationality, universalism, and singularity. All these things are there. Now, let me just give you another slide that will take us somewhat forward in our story, because I seem to have got stuck with this a little longer than I had thought. So, but nevertheless, let me come very quickly to this. So here we are, and here I am sharing my screen. Okay. So because of this, because of the fact that disciplinary history is like this, we get to know that history is about important people and events. These are the people who control the nation and control the state. It is also quite simple because there is a set of principles laid out. So what one has to do is one has to get a source, and then one has to apply reason, and then one can get that source to yield the truth. So the state wants to know when India became free. So you look at all the documents from 1947 and you find out that this is how India got free. You know all the people, you know all the discussions that happened, all the meetings, all the conferences, important figures, everything, all of them are there because the documents are there. You see, the state maintains all the documents. So the documents are there and you can easily find out what has happened. And once this truth has been found out, history has been found out, what does this truth tell us? This truth tells us that all of us are parts of ancient nations that are seeking to develop themselves into the highest forms of civilization. Why did we have a freedom struggle? Why was the Indian state formed? Where are we coming from? Where are we going? And you must have heard this all the time. We are a very ancient civilization. We are destined to greatness. For some time, the British came and controlled us, and they killed our spirit and they destroyed our lands. But now we have fought. We have reclaimed our spirit, and we are now in charge of our nation. And now we will take this nation forward to greater and greater glory. So that is the story that history tells us. Okay? And that is where all the things that you pointed out, important people, invaders, temples, sources, Hitler, Gandhi, all of these figures are very much part of this history. You think about it carefully and you will see that it is a story about these things that you pointed out. And these things is what I'm telling you here, history is about. Important people and events. Easily determinable. We can find out what's happening. And why are we finding this out? Because we are taking our nation further and forward into greater and greater progress. Okay. But you must be thinking about yourself, and Shrishti had pointed that out, and a few others had also pointed that out. She spoke about weavers, she spoke about social workers. Where are the we in history? Where is Shrishti? Where is APD? Where is Preetam sir? Where is Leslie sir? Where is Abhiroop? Where is Moonma? Where is Tejas? We don't know. They are not there. It's only about big people. It's not about us, is it? We are sitting in the car, but the driver is somebody else, and we are almost blindfolded. Somebody has put a blindfold over our eyes. We don't know what's happening. Right? It has to be written. History has to be written. State writes documents. So if a tribal person is talking about his ancestors, then the historian will ask, who has written this? How did you find out? Who told you? Is there a document? Is it written? There's this confusion. What is your ancestor doing in you, and what are you doing in your ancestor? Why is God intervening? Can God intervene? What is the proof? So when people have memories other than written memories that the state has, then all that doesn't figure in history. It's called mythology. It's called stories, legends, okay, epics, poem, not really history. It is not the truth. And then you begin to ask yourself that if your voice is not heard, like I as a tribal person, if my voice is not heard, if they're going to doubt whether there is truth in what I'm saying, and that truth will be not accepted if it is not written, if there are many of us saying different things about the same thing, then we will further be doubted, and so on and so forth. Then we start asking ourselves, whose nation is this? And whose civilization is this? Are we really part of this story or not? Very simply this. What about women? For a long time, our histories were only about men. Once in a while, you would have Cleopatra. Once in a while, you would have the Queen of Sheba. But the woman who was working in the house, confined within the domestic sphere, and doing very, very important work, her life was not considered worth writing about. Wars, world wars, invasions is what you wrote about. You never wrote about the drudgery of domestic life. It was not important. What about the tribal people? Since they had not any written documents, they had not left behind large tomes of archives and record rooms. They just had these stories. Sometimes they changed these stories, so on and so forth. They were not reliable. No, not important enough, you know. They have to be changed. They must become modern. When they start writing, when they learn our history, then they can come into history. But they don't have any history. How do you know what happened in the tribal people's life in the 15th century? You don't know. You don't know what happened in their life in the 12th century. You don't know. Because they have no documents to show. They have nothing, they have no figures to talk about. They don't have figures like Ashoka or Akbar, etc. You know, they just live like savages, perhaps. They are not even worthy of history. You see, so working people, who is interested in the life of working people? As Shrishti pointed out, weavers. They keep doing their work. There are weavers, there are blacksmiths, there are you know, people who do household chores amongst us. Has anybody written the history of domestic helps? No one has written the history of domestic helps. Has anyone written the history of children? No, no one has written the history of children. Has anyone written the history of workers in the tea gardens? No, no one has written the history of the workers in tea gardens. We are only writing histories of kings and rulers and invasions and governments. We are not writing about these things. So what I want you to do now is to take a break and to think about somebody or something whose history has not been written. Because it is not the history of the state, it is not the history of the nation. Or even if it is the history of the nation, it is not an equal history. So women are also part of the nation, but as we know, women are only half the citizens. So I want you to think about some figure, some person, some event, the small things of life, the everyday of life, you know, about which there should be history because it is meaningful to you. For example, who has written the history of Brahmaputra? No one has written the history of the Brahmaputra. Now somebody is starting to write the history of the Majuli Islands, but for a long time no one had written the history of the Majuli Islands. Don't people live there? Don't they live like all of us do? Why is their life less important than the life of others who live in Delhi? Why are the lives of people in Chhattisgarh or Northeast India less important than, say, the stories of people who live in Delhi and other central parts of India? So just take a break of about 3-4 minutes, if Mr. Pritam will allow, and think about what history could you write, which would be about a person or a place or an event or a thing, you know, that the history has not been written of. And that would add substantially to our knowledge about ourselves and about who we are. But it is a neglected topic. So I want you to think about whose history needs to be written and has not been written so far. And if you were to be given that charge of finding that person whose voice must be brought out, then who would that person be? Or what would that person be? Or what would that event be? Or what would that phenomena or experience be? Right? Which is meaningful to you, but which is considered trivial, unimportant, insignificant, small, secondary in history. Right? So all of you can become historians for about 3-4 minutes and think about what unusual, different history of somebody whose history has not been written you would like to write about. It could be anything. It could be a plant, a river, a mountain, a person, a community, even a government you think has not been, a language, a craft, a commodity. Like, for example, who has written a history of tea? I know there's a friend of mine who writes now the history of tea. But for a long time, no one was interested in the history of tea. People wrote about tea, but they were interested in tea because it was a lot of trade between India and China, between India and Britain. That was their interest. The interest was in the state. They were interested in the nation, in these big things, right? It was not, for example, about tea itself. You see how tea was produced, who produced it, who drank it, what was the experience of drinking it, and so on and so forth. Something that is so important to us that goes into the making of our lives. So who is to decide what is important? Who is to decide what is not important? So for a moment, I want you to give you the historian's baton. And it is you who should decide what should be legitimately history. And think about something that you think the history of has not been written. Okay, so let me give you a break of about a few minutes and you write something down. You don't have to write too much. You can just write one thing also. Just write one word or a phrase or something. Think about it and write that down.
APD, I've sent you some chats. Look at the last one for now.
Sure. Let me just
let me know.
Ah, I see. Okay.
There's no problem. Huh? So, can you give an estimate so that I know? I have another appointment and I'll decide about how much. Sure. Maybe 30?
Say.
Do it, estimate on the more liberal side, please. No point estimating on a. Better to estimate on a liberal side so that you don't rush.
Okay. Sorry. So I think I'll manage in another of these. So 5.
Okay. Because they'll take now about 3-4 minutes. After that, you'll need time. So, okay? Great. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. I just took off on a tangent.
Have you seen my other comments?
Yeah, I'm just going to.
I think I'm becoming your shishya soon.
Sorry.
Even if you don't see me, I'm listening to you all the time. I have a Bluetooth.
Sure.
So I'm just going to the kitchen. So please let me write on a chat if you want.
So Tejas, please write something for me. I want to learn what it is that you want to be the historian of. Please give me a good answer. Abhinash, Simadeep, Madhujya, Dia, Shavya, there's Deep Jyoti. I hope I'm taking only the names of students because I have no way of telling. Just in case I am taking the name of some teachers, please pardon me because it is difficult to.
All students.
Right. Okay. They're all students. Excellent. Wonderful. Wonderful. Biswajyoti. There's also Najis. There's Mehek. Purbashi. What lovely names all of you have.
Yes.
I think I need to come and speak to you just about your names. Leslie, I just wanted to tell you I'm collecting a set of essays on tribal history.
Okay.
And one of my contributors is a person who teaches in a college in Arunachal.
Okay.
And he's looking at the history of the Galo tribes.
Galo, yes. Okay.
Galo tribes through onomastics, through names.
Two names.
So what he says is that at a certain point of time, the Galos started writing their names in a certain way that mentioned only the male members of the family and not the female members.
Okay.
So what he says is that he wants to go back to a time before that where names were written differently, where the descent from the women was also recorded.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, because it's a fascinating thing, because there's no history of the Galos otherwise.
Yeah.
So through a study of these names, he has actually written a brilliant essay.
Okay.
On the history of Galo women.
Another 2 minutes, students.
Yeah, a name like Purbashri.
Yes.
We need to have the history of the name.
Yeah, Purbashri.
Obviously, it has some meaning.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now look at this name, Sir Long John Inti. Inti is the title.
Yes, yes. Raisa. And there's Ankita.
Ankita, yeah.
Spelled very differently. Very interesting. Sayan. Akshpreet. So just to say something to Preetam, what he said at the beginning, that actually my name, my father always called me by my nickname, which is Joe.
Oh, not Aditya Pratap. Aditya. Okay.
So it's a kind of, it is a name that throws people off the scent. The moment, people find me being called Joe, they start wondering, what has gone wrong. Or perhaps what has gone right, because Aditya Pratap Deo is such a long name. Joe is so easy. So finally he gets a name which is easy. So actually I was born in a Christian mission hospital. Okay. And the head doctor of that hospital, Dr. Himmat Singh Martin, was a very good friend of my father's. Okay. And he developed a proprietorial kind of sense over his firstborn son, which was me. And he said, well, I will name him. So my father was completely helpless. And the only thing that he said was that please don't insist that this be his official name, because that would create a major crisis. Joe Pratap Deo would have been, quite outlandish.
I'm up, by the way. It's 5 minutes over. Yeah.
Okay. So we have Abhiroop. Abhiroop, let's start with
you. Yes, sir. Sir, there should be history written for education, history of education.
Very good. The history of education. Yes, excellent. Lovely. So you see,
sir, and all
this
the
is very
and rivers.
Sorry.
Say it again.
Sir, and history of all the forests and rivers, because from the rivers we are getting water, and from forests we are getting wood.
Yes.
Many fruits and vegetables like that.
Forests and rivers. So environmental history. History of education, history of environment. So you see, one of the ways in which we find that this linear history of history is very wrong is that, do you think that we are going forward as far as the environment is concerned? Do you think that our environment is getting better and better with time?
No, we're definitely going back.
Absolutely. So here is one very good example of how this whole idea of always moving forward is hugely problematic. In fact, by moving forward in this direction, we will end up jeopardizing our very existence on Earth. So I think that's a very good point that Abhiroop has made. Shrishti, you're ready to say something.
Sir, the question was which event or which people's history should be mentioned in history. So when I heard the question, instantly something came to my mind, and it was about the car protest which took place in December last year. And as an Assamese, I just think that the car protest, history of the car protest was well definedly mentioned in history, but the people whose life were sacrificed unintentionally, I mean, I don't remember their names exactly, but many of their lives who were very young aged people, their lives were sacrificed. And though the people mourn over their death, like we will not celebrate Bihu this year because of their death, but their history is never mentioned in a well-defined manner, why they lost their life in such a way. So I think the names of those people should be mentioned in history, in the history of
Absolutely, very
Assam.
right, very right. So what
All the
about,
martyrs.
sorry.
I was saying history of all the martyrs.
Yes,
Yes,
so
yes,
what
yes,
I think Shrishti is saying is, what about all those faceless, nameless people who will just be a figure in our
yes,
newspapers? You
yes,
see, they will never really get their due. So what about them? What about these lives that have been lost? And so the history of death, you know, the history of
yes, sir.
unaccounted death, the history of nameless, faceless death. That is what
And
you're talking about.
another
Yes.
point I would like to mention that Taj Mahal is a monument, but we do mention the king who constructed it. We never give credit to the laborers, the workers who sacrificed their lives and built that monument. So
Yeah.
if in futures any monument will be built, we should give the credit to the laborers too. Their names should be mentioned in history because it is the result of their work only, I feel like.
Yes. Sorry, I was out for a moment. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
repeat. Sir, I
No,
told
I
that.
got your point. Yeah. So the history of labor. So what about those people who build these huge, glorious monuments for
Precious
us?
monuments. We don't give
Yeah.
credit to them. We just say that it was built by that king, but the king didn't build it.
Yeah. So do we know how much labor was expended? Do we know what kind of labor regimes were used? Do we know where these laborers lived?
Yes, sir.
Do we know where they are coming from? Do we know how much they were paid? We don't know. We have no
Yes, sir.
idea.
So we should try in future to conserve those informations for the future
Yes.
generation.
Yeah. And as you know, because these people have been denied the ability of writing, which is what the
Yes, sir.
state controls, we never get to hear from them. These are the voiceless people, once again.
Exactly.
Absolutely fine. So Shishti has pointed out two very important absences in history. You see, the unmourned dead in these resistance movements and these protests. And of course, the
Oh, I think Aditya, can you hear?
No,
Oh, he's got thrown out, I think.
no, he's there, but his sound and video is gone.
He'll come back.
sorry.
Yeah,
We
getting thrown
often,
out from time to time.
yeah, so there's Dr. Baker from college who's calling me. And he's this senior professor who taught me and who gets very worked up now. He's about 80 plus. And every now and then he gives me a call, and he calls me repeatedly 2 or 3 times within a short spell. So don't worry, he will understand. So I was talking about these silences, and Shrishti has very rightly pointed out. So let's now hear from people who haven't spoken before, if they are interested. Otherwise, those who have some ideas can say something. Yes. Thank you, Shrishti.
You
No
can
worries,
raise
sir.
your hand, digital hand.
Okay. Josh wants to say something?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
So I think history of evolution in the case of modern scientific technologies that are discovered large before the time we were. So the procedure that started on the modern scientific, such as development of smartphones, telephones. So each and every modern scientific technology should be preserved in such a way that we can know how how the scientists or how the researchers develop these ideas to invent or discover modern scientific technologies.
Absolutely.
Each and
And
every case.
yeah, thank you so much. I think you can see this in the case of the pandemic. All of us are expecting a vaccine to suddenly, miraculously appear from somewhere. We don't know the extremely long and excruciating process of epidemiological research and vaccine making that actually goes into creating a successful vaccine. Similarly, the story of every successful smartphone or every successful computer model is based on hundreds of false starts, failures, delays, problems, struggles, and we don't know anything about. We just get to know the final product when it gets displayed in a fancy store somewhere in India or somewhere in China. And we get to know that this vaccine is successful. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Dr. Baker's calling again. Should I just call him and tell him that I'll call him later?
I think it might be better that you are in a
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah. Just give me a moment. I'm so sorry for this.
Sorry, boys and girls, it's lunchtime in Norway. And I don't want to miss this session, so I'm eating while I'm listening. I hope I'm not opening my mouth too much.
Sorry, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I just spoke to Dr. Baker and assured him that I'm around and that he's been writing this history of St. Stephen's College. So I think Abhirup pointed out history of education. So here is the story of a college which has contributed to education in the city of Delhi and in the country for a very long time. But for a long, long time, there is no history of that. And Dr. Baker is actually writing this story where one full chapter is going to be devoted to the students in St. Stephen's College in the 1930s and the 40s. You know, about how they were joining the freedom struggle, how they were facing resistance from their parents who wanted them to just study, how the college was forcing them to come to class when they actually had to go and spend time in Swadeshi and other such movements that were happening at that time, what their relationship with their teachers were, how many teachers were sympathetic to them, how many were not, and you know, how did they make ends meet, what happened when people got expelled, how did those who were in college help them. So he's going to try and create the life of St. Stephen's College in those very, very important decades of the 1930s and the 40s. Just like if someone was to write the history of Loyola school in Nagaon, then, it'd be such a fascinating history, because Nagaon, as you know, is a very important place. Apart from being one of the largest districts in Assam, it is also the district which was the birthplace of Shankardev, the great poet saint of Assam, who is referred to as Hankardev in Assamese. And it is a school named after, I think it was a school set up in 1967, if I'm not wrong. And it is a school that is named after Ignatius of Loyola. So fascinating, you can start with that, and then you can show the life of the school and what it has contributed to the region and to the state, and of course to the nation, rather than always start with the nation and then think of the school as something secondary. How about starting from Loyola High School in Nagaon, and from there try to see what the nation looks like? Yes. Thank you, Josh. Any other? Any other? Mehek, do you have something to say, or Viswajyoti? And Dia and Narjis, any suggestions? Okay, anyway, so from among some of you who have given me some clues as to what kinds of histories you would like to write about, one can see how large and diverse the field of history can be. There can be a history of childhood, there can be a history of domestic helps, there can be a history of servants, there can be a history of laborers, there can be a history of schools, there can be a history of rivers, there can be a history of forests, there can be a history of islands like Majuli, there can be a history of death, there can be a history of vaccines, there can be a history of a people's history of technology, there can be a history of transport. So there can be a history of roads. Do we know who built the first roads? Do we know how people would travel before proper roads were built? We don't know. We could do a history of roads. We could do a history of animal husbandry, right? We can do a history of drainage in the city. We can do the history of gardens and parks. We can do a history of travel. We can do a history of writing instruments. We can do a history of tea. We can do a history of oil. And there are so many ways in which, say, think about Assam. Even the history of Assam can be opened up to actually get filled with voices that have so far not been heard. It is very important now for us to move out of the nation and the state-centered histories and to write the histories of the everyday, of these small little experiences that nations and states dismiss as unimportant, but which are very, very important to our lives, our feelings. Right. So in reference to that, I just wanted to present just one slide, which will then tell us what kinds of histories I think one can try and aim for. So here comes the slide, one of the last slides in this sequence, which I will present to you. And here is the slide. So the truth about history is that history is about all of us. And if someone is telling us that we should only be writing about the Indian nation or the Indian state, about big things, big people, big events, then we are not obliged to listen to them. We should write histories that are meaningful to us, right? So the history is about us people, and it's about the everyday. It is also a history that is not singular, but it has many voices. The voice of the woman, the voice of the child, the voice of the laborer, the voice of the tribal person, the voice of the tea vendor, the voice of people who fish in the Brahmaputra and make their living through the river. So all these voices have to come in, and these voices must be used to pluralize history, to make it our history. We need to own up to that history. And it doesn't matter if it moves in different ways. If it moves from future to present to past, if it moves cyclically, if it moves vertically, we don't care. If it is not rational, we don't care. If it is not universal, we don't want a universal history. We don't want to get trapped in this car which is being driven only by one driver and all of us are sitting blindfolded there. No, we want to be able to see. We want to take turns in driving. We want to tell the direction in which the car will go, right? So history is essentially then, or should become, a struggle to shape the world. We want to know where we are coming from in our own way. So a woman will write her history very differently from how a man will write the history. And the woman will then decide what she feels about her present. And she will then decide what future she wants to go to. The forest peoples who are seeing their forests being destroyed, they are the ones who will decide what their history has been like. And if it has been a story of destruction of forests, then let us know about it. And if they want to move in a direction which doesn't necessarily take us forward towards development and civilization, fine. Because that might be the only way in which we can save the world, right? So now to the next following sort of set of thoughts, the uses of history. If history is like this, if it is multivocal, if there's so many voices, if so many different people own this history and write their history and tell their history, and then decide what should happen to their present and what should happen to their futures, then we will see that history can be a very important and transforming force in our lives. So here it is. We can understand who we all are and what we want to do with our lives. Let not the government decide. We can understand why our world is the way it is so that we can solve its challenges better. And we don't want somebody sitting in Delhi telling us that, listen, we know what has gone wrong with you and we are going to tell you what the solution to that is. And that kind of history will create a more democratic, equal, prosperous, peaceful, and sustainable world, right? So that is the kind of history that all of us should try for. So I think I'm running out of time, and before we sort of go off, let me quickly give you something more useful in a concrete, practical sense of the term. So if you want to study history, what kinds of careers might you think about that have to do especially with history? So one of them is that you can be a historian. You can help the world find its voice. You can reach out to that person who has not been able to tell her story. And you can make sure that that story gets included in the many, many voices that must now enter the domain of history, that must create a plural, diverse, rich people's history. What we need is not the history of India. We need a history, a people's history of India, right? Which is going in so many different ways, which is using so many different ideas of time, and which is thinking about our world and our problems from the points of view of all the people who make this land, and not just from the point of view of a few. So you can be a historian. There's this wonderful book by Bipin Chandra called The History of Modern India, which is read by a lot of people who want to join the civil services examination. But you can read it too, because it has large sections on the laboring populations. So alongside the history of Gandhi and Nehru, it also tells you a little about who the people working to make our lives what they were doing at that time during the freedom movement and the anti-imperial struggle. There's this wonderful and old history book of Assam by the well-known colonial historian Edward Gate called The History of Assam. So you can be a historian, and I would invite you to become one. You can be a teacher like I am, like Leslie sir is, like Pritam sir is also, like many of your teachers are, Dr. Goswami. And you can help spread the word around and to give people the voices to be able to bring out their own experiences. So this is a picture of me with my students when we had gone to the to the Qutub Minar. The Qutub Minar in Delhi is a very important monument, and I teach a history called the History of Delhi. And so one of the things that we can do often to break the boredom of of continuous classroom teaching is to go to one of these monuments, because Delhi is full of monuments. And since this is a course about the history of Delhi, no one feels unhappy about the fact that we keep going off every week and enjoying ourselves at one or the other monuments all over the city of Delhi. So this is one of my pictures with my students in Qutub Minar. You can become a curator. A curator is someone who manages a museum. But before that, sorry. Oh, sorry. I've gone very far ahead. Let me just come back to where we were. So here it is. Yes. So you can be a historian, you can be a teacher, you can be a curator, you can work in one of the big museums in Assam or in other parts of India. You can also become an archaeologist. They do very interesting things. As you can see, this is a picture from a dig. And if I'm not wrong, this is a picture from China, the Terracotta Army. As you know, in China, in the province of Xi'an, there is this huge underground pit where there are hundreds and hundreds of terracotta soldiers that a certain king had buried with himself because he did not want to go to heaven without his army. And of course, he couldn't kill everybody. So what he did was, and thankfully he didn't, that he actually built terracotta figures of his soldiers, and all of them were buried with him so that they could go with him to heaven, and he would be ushered into the very presence of God by his own army. So here are historians, archaeologists.
I've been there, by the way.
Yes, so have I. And it's a
you have?
grand,
okay.
Yes, last year during my travel to China. Yes. So you can be an archaeologist and dig up another pyramid or, another terracotta army. You can be an archivist. A lot of government offices, even corporate offices, private companies now want people who intelligently file all their documents. All the knowledge of the firm, all the knowledge of an organization is actually kept in that repository, which is the archive. And a historian knows best how to file. Okay, so you can be an archivist. There are actually jobs that are meant for archivists. So that is one. These days, because of the massive expansion in the media, especially the television media, but also other kinds of media, there are a lot of history-related programs. There are also movies and books and websites and television series and so on and so forth. So you need historians to be able to write the content for those things. So if you are making a movie, for example, like Ben-Hur, or you're trying to make a serial on, say, the life of Marco Polo, then of course you need a historian who can write that out for you. So the expansion of the internet has massively increased the opportunities for this kind of writing about history. Okay, so National Geographic, History Channel, all of these channels, etc. And there are many, many hundreds of smaller channels as well. Sports channels also need sports historians and so on and so forth. All of them need people with history backgrounds. So they actually advertise for people with history backgrounds. Then of course, tourism. As you know, tourism is a lot about heritage, and historians are supposed to understand heritage and have knowledge about heritage better than most other people. So they are being increasingly employed in large and small tourism firms everywhere to provide specialized knowledge. This is a historian guide who is taking a group of tourists on a tour of Machu Picchu, the old Inca capital high up in the Andes in South America. Okay, so you can be a tourism person also. And of course, there is a history factor in all the jobs, whether you're a politician, a civil servant, a journalist, a policymaker, economist, social worker, scientist, engineer. Think about it, and everybody will be the richer if they have done a little bit of history, or they have a historical aspect to how they think and what they do. And so if you have a civil servant who reads a little bit of the history of his land, you can perhaps expect him to be a little more sensitive to the work that he does among the people of that area, the policies that he implements, and so on and so forth. If you have a journalist who has a background in history, who has an interest in history, who reads history book, then his writing will have a certain depth that other writings that have not used a historical background will not. If you have an environmentalist who knows the history of the relationship of the people with their environment, then obviously he will become important in making suggestions and policy measures that will be again sensitive to the question of sustainability, and so on and so forth. In the context of the pandemic that is going on now, there have been a lot of essays and articles written by historian epidemiologists. So these are both people who deal with epidemics, plus they have a sense of history. So that from the basis of all the information that they have about past epidemics, they're able to say something useful, meaningful to us about present epidemics, and so on and so forth. So there is just no end to where all history can have its applications apart from these specialized jobs that are open to historians as well. So just in case there is somebody who tells you when you are deciding which of the three streams you're going to take up, arts, science, and commerce, that only weak students or those who are not very intelligent should take arts and the good ones should do science and commerce, don't listen to them. Listen to your mind, listen to your heart. Every subject is good if it is pursued with dedication, interest, commitment, and vision. So history is as good as any other subject or as poor as any other subject. But no subject is poor absolutely. All subjects participate in creating who we are and giving us a sense of where we are coming from and where we want to go. So insofar as that is true, history is a very important element of our lives. Without it, our lives will always remain incomplete. So thank you very much. And I'm really grateful to Preetam and Leslie for having me be with you and converse with you. And I really enjoyed meeting everybody and would love to visit your school at some point, as I've been very kindly invited. You're free to get in touch with me if you have any queries and questions. And I hope that some conversations will follow and that we will become good friends, pursuing the good of everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Before we wind up, Aditya, we'd love to have you here one day soon, interacting with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sure you love Nagaon, you love Assam.
Absolutely. You won't believe this, but I have an unusually large number of friends from Assam. Okay, so it's like a second home to me, even though I haven't been here many times. Because I know that I live in the hearts and the minds of these friends.
The Assamese are one of the most hospitable and friendly people.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you know that.
Yes, yes.
Except Preetam.
But let me inform the students here that the crowdfunding project that we did to get you phones and now phones for other students of other schools, one large contributor came through APD because he has so many loyal and friendly people in Assam. They contributed in a significant way because soon after he spoke, I found a lot of things coming from that direction. So thank you, APD, for contributing. Besides your own contribution, you got others to contribute. I'll stop here.
I'm grateful I am grateful that I was allowed to be part of this very, very laudable project. And all the best with that.
Yeah. And thank you so much, APD. Maybe we should have some more sessions in the future because history is something most children think, history. We'll talk about it later. So maybe your session inspire some of them to become archaeologists or historians or curators.
Yeah, sorry, I was not able to handle the time properly, but perhaps, if I later come at some point or whatever, I'll make sure that I keep to time and do my bit as planned. And all the best to all of you. Stay safe and stay healthy during this difficult time. I'm sure this will pass soon. As a historian, I can tell you that epidemics have come and gone. Human beings have continued to, go from strength to strength. So we will.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Srishti, would you like to say something, Srishti?
So in the last, I would like to mention that I really enjoyed this session and it was amazing to meet you. I was able to connect with you, and I always feel like history is something my subject because my mother was a lecturer in history. She did passed away this year, but she always asked me to study history. She always encouraged me to know more, read other books apart from studies, and I really enjoyed it. I hope we will meet soon someday.
Yeah. In fact, Srishti's mother passed away about 2 months back, right, Srishti?
So sorry.
No,
So
9
sorry.
months.
So
9 months.
sorry. So sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So this is important for her.
And definitely, Srishti, if you want to pursue a career in history, there could be no other reference point and mentor than APD. I can tell you, sure. So you should definitely connect with him and discuss in more one-to-one how you can pursue history from what angles. He'll love it and you'll love it.
I love to.
Yeah.
You're most welcome.
From modern history.
Wonderful. I will pass on my email ID and contacts to both Mr. Pritam and Mr. Leslie, and you are most free to get in touch whenever you want. Thank you so much.
Okay, Pritam. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you so much. APD, can you stay back, and Leslie, and I request the others to leave. Thank you so much for your attendance, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye,
Bye,
sir.
sir.
Bye-bye, sir.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye. Shavya, Sayan, Narjis, are you still around?
They're not actually there, I think.
Can I do something? Can I
Yeah.
end it? Can you reconnect APD and Leslie?
They'll leave now.
No, if they're not there, and it's like their speakers are on, I don't want to discuss internal things with them. Thank you, Purvashri, Naji, Shravya, Sayan. You have some meeting now, APD, and a class or meeting or something? Okay, I think I can remove them. I have the possibility. Yes, I can remove them. I'll remove. I've forgotten that. The power that I had to write history and to remove people.
You're muted.
I'm not muted. Aditya is muted.
No, I was saying I really like this way in which Leslie emerges and sort of, this is really fantastic. I must get this from my...
Yeah. And it doesn't work for everyone, unfortunately. In my Zoom, it doesn't work. Yeah. So APD, since I'm sure Leslie also has other commitments you have, and I have to rush off, just wanted, you spent so much of effort and time, wanted your reflections first, APD. How did you feel about this session? What do you think went well? What do you think you'd like to do differently, maybe? Any thoughts that come to your mind without much analysis?
Right. So I perhaps realized that doing it at their regular time would have been better. I think as you pointed out, 4 o'clock was an unusual time for them, and many of them perhaps were not able to connect as fully as we might have expected them to. So I think it might be best to keep your speakers in the given slot, which is most convenient for students rather than the resources. That might help, because the idea is to reach out to as many people as possible. And I'm sure they have constraints that disallow them to come in other odd times. Well, one is that. The second is that mightn't it be a good idea to just take a feedback from them also and see how they might be more participative? What structural changes, format changes might help them become more participative.
Right.
Some, of course, will not connect at all. Some are shy and all that, but it is possible that there are some who are not connecting because of reasons we can help.
Right.
So if we get a feedback from them about, say, what the last 5 or 10 such sessions have meant to them and what they have gained and what they would want changed and etc., then that might be a good way to go ahead with this.
Right.
Yeah. Mightn't it be possible also to connect some teachers also to the sessions and have them enthuse the students?
I invited the 2 history teachers, but Monday is their off day, so I didn't want to pressurize them.
So if some teachers can be brought into the format, and if something can result from that, meaning if every resource person leaves behind some material to reflect on, etc., and then the teachers follow up and make sure that something concrete happens, either they are assessed on it or evaluated or just taken a feedback from, or something like that, where the teachers follow up and try and kind of weave this into what they are doing to make it, more long-lasting and enduring, and become part of the institutional rhythm rather than just this being a one-off thing that happens somewhere, but nothing else happens. So perhaps in that case, speaking to the resource person in advance in order to achieve certain material and or other kinds of communication that provides a certain core sort of resource which can be picked up by the teacher and put into the rhythm. That could also be useful.
One reason I do not call the teachers are it prohibits the children. When the teacher is there, the children sort of go back into classroom mode and they're not as
we did that once, remember? We did that once, and we felt they feel inhibited now also a bit.
So do you feel that there's only a set of people who are interacting, or
no, there's always a set of people. I see a lot of set of people, but remember, participation, as I always keep telling from a facilitative point of view, participation is not only the ones who talk in plenary. And that's why it's very important to give them an opportunity to work in breakout rooms. Because in breakout rooms, they feel much safer. They feel confident because they can share their ideas, test their ideas with others. They feel confident that they don't opening their mouth in the plenary and making a fool of themselves. And it's not important that they are seen as contributing in plenary. It's more important that they think, digest, and reflect on what is being said. So in small plenaries, when I visit from room to room, I see more discussions going on, though they may not come out and speak in plenary. So that is another way of also getting them very engaged. It also breaks the monotony of a long talk where you ask people to ask questions, but only some people ask, others are still listening and therefore getting tired. So that is one engagement way that you can easily do it to get more involvement. No problem. Yeah, APD.
Can you shorten the length of the session?
We had kept it at 90 minutes. Yeah, the idea of keeping it 90 minutes was to make it more participatory and therefore allow more participatory processes to run. Not participatory by throwing a question in plenary, but things like this, or activities. We do activities also. Like one there's an activity, each one write 2 ideas, and then okay, you pair them up in groups. Now you share your ideas. Now you put the pairs together in 4s. It's called 1, 2, 4. There are many different facilitative processes possible, and those take time. But the time is good because it brings good value for money in terms of quality. So we did not want to encourage too much of a lecture, and that's why we kept it 90. That's what my thought was. But we can, of course, always reduce to 60 minutes. No problem. But until now, no speaker has finished in 60 minutes, even with a largely lecture approach.
Right.
Yeah. I want to say something. I think it was it was brilliant opening. I mean, you couldn't have started with such a beautiful opening. First of all, you kind of praise the student who made you feel home. Immediately you connect with the person. You're making connections. Secondly, you call many people by name, making connections.
That's very important.
Thirdly, that was very important. Thirdly, you started with a very powerful open question. What comes to your mind? You didn't put it in question form. You said, write down 5 things that come to your mind when you think of history. That's like what comes to your mind. So you did 2 powerful techniques that I see from. One, you asked an open question when there are many possibilities. Therefore, people can think diversely, more inputs can come in. Secondly, you gave a quota. Think of 5. So it triggers the brain. When you say think, just think, what will happen? People get tired after the initial thought comes, and that is normally a habitual thought, not a new idea. but you put a quota. I don't know if you did it intentionally, but that's called, today I was discussing quota-based brainstorming with my client. Very, very powerful. Then you debriefed each of the responses very beautifully. Every response you took, and then you said, okay, this is what was also said by this. So you saw the commonality, but you emphasize the uniqueness of each contribution. Can you imagine the amount of self-esteem it's giving to the participant? And self-esteem, not just for the purpose of self-esteem. I think it's the responsibility of a teacher to build the self-esteem of students so that they can think freely and open up. Many of them don't open up because they don't have enough self-esteem. And that's common even in adults. Even in adult workshop, people don't open up. Yeah, we have to have these various processes. So that was really fantastically done, very beautifully done. One thing, though you did defend yourself, I still don't agree. It is very important when a task is given according to me to give them the silence to think uninterruptedly. Continuously feeding them with ideas has two disadvantages. One, you cannot concentrate. It's like, people making loud noise when you're trying to study for an exam. Can't think. Number two, when you give too many hints, you're taking away the creativity. The students are already surprising with very interesting ideas. Don't take away the creativity by giving hints. How does time move, Don't give hints first. Only when they're in big trouble, you see nothing is coming out, then drop a hint. In other words, the default position is they have the capability to come up with. As Leslie was writing to me, they don't stop to surprise me. So you could try that next time, and you always have a fallback position. So silence and no hints. That would be fantastic. I think that will, so breakout rooms with silence will automatically come when you give breakout rooms. You can't interfere. They are in their rooms. It would be brilliant. This whole session, I think, was so fascinating. You won't believe me. I was sitting on the commode and still listening, making sure my video was not on because I had to get ready for my next appointment. I had no choice. So I took it, and to be doubly sure, though video was off, I turned the thing towards the wall, just in case the students saw me with my pants down.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for the feedback.
Only thing that let me down finally was that which excited me so much. Why learn history? You just hurried too much. You didn't get them to think at all. You talked also about what is history, which was fascinating, which you never thought you would discuss. I never thought you would discuss that. And I already had a response. I wanted to also participate, but I didn't. I held myself back. But why learn history didn't come out very clearly. Perhaps you hadn't carefully thought through your session in terms of time management. So you just gave away your ideas. You can be a curator, you can be this. They would have loved to think themselves why learn history after all. So please divide your time in such a way that they have 50% time left for why they want. Now that you understand what history is, and now why do you think you should learn history? Bahut maza aayega. So thank you. It was fascinating.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks a lot.
How many audience sits on a commode and listen? You know, I had a problem. I had to shave. And I said, I'll wear this and shave. I can't. So then I had to bring the laptop into the bathroom. So that is why the situation. Yes, you're simply brilliant. I mean, the way you connect.
Yes, I'm really grateful because, I can see this is a wonderful initiative. I was trying to read a little bit of the history of your school. Unfortunately, I didn't get very much. So I'm going to pick your brains and ask you to give me something about this because there is a YouTube page, a channel.
Yeah.
And there are a few mentions. There's a LinkedIn mention of Leslie, but not a proper substantial sort of write-up. I would love to know.
This might inspire Leslie to start thinking of getting someone to write the history of his school. And do you know something? His father was such a dedicated teacher. He actually established a school in Bhutan. And for the great work he was doing, the king of Bhutan presented the sword of honor. It's a wooden sword. And my very good friend in Bhutan, who is in Her Majesty's court, so he's directly linked there. He said this is given very rarely. This sword is hanging in Leslie's room. I said, this is not the way to hang it. Please encase it in glass and, keep it properly.
So is Lieutenant N.M. Joseph.
N.M. Joseph is his father.
Yes, I realized. You see, when I was looking at the languages that there was Malayalam, there was Khasi, there was Assamese, there was, of course, Bengali because you were in Calcutta. I was very intrigued. And then when I saw N.M. Joseph, I said, okay, now it's connected.
Why? How is it connected?
Because Malayalam, no?
Okay, Malayalam. Okay.
Malayalam, and then so, but then the Northeast.
How does he know Khasi? Can you tell me?
Perhaps
he
your
studied
mother.
In Shillong. He studied in Shillong.
Shillong, and
but that's not the reason. Our study in Shillong was completely cocoon. He has a Khasi wife.
Oh, I thought I was saying mother, but wife.
Now, mother is very much Malayalam. The Khasi wife, and big issues from a different church. And he's from a Catholic. I remember I was part of there. I was an observer in the negotiations, major negotiations.
I see.
Because they had to have both ways. Shadi yahan, engagement yahan, this, that. They were both arguing in very serious business.
Yes.
So Leslie, that sword, please take a picture of that sword and send it to APD. I've just told him about it. And please do something about it. Keep it better, yeah. Glass encasing with a beautiful thing. And with you're muted. You're muted. Muted. Yeah. Leslie, you're muted.
My father has
one paragraph history.
My father has written a history of the school. It's a little booklet.
Oh.
I'll send it to you all.
Please send, yeah. Please send. That'll be fantastic.
He wrote it.
Yeah. Please carry on.
Would you be averse to putting it online, that history?
No, I won't. But actually, he wrote it when he was past 75, 70. So parts of it is a little bit of rambling. You know, he was old, but it's okay.
No, but why can't you get it edited?
Yeah, I'll do that.
If you get it edited and then put it up, right now you share it with us. Get it properly edited. Cut out the rambling.
I'm getting a website done, so I'll put it there.
Oh, that'll be. You must get a website done because your school is so well known and the kind of stuff you have is hopeless. Please get a website.
And one more thing I wanted to ask is, was he sort of personally inspired by Loyola?
No, he studied in Loyola Madras.
I see.
So that's one reason. He actually had joined the Brotherhood, you know, the Montfort brothers. Have you heard of them? So he was going to become a brother, and then I would have existed. But for some reason...
You might have, but illegally.
He was senior and he left the Brotherhood. And then he went to Bombay. He was teaching in a school in Bombay. And that's when he got a job, an offer to sort of start a school, run a school in Bhutan. And he went there. And, you know, then from there he came to Shillong and all that.
So he taught in St. Edmunds where we studied.
Yeah.
So that day we were discussing in a... Oh, he's again disappeared.
He's there.
No, he's frozen. Can you see?
Oh, yeah.
Keeps freezing. No, I wanted to tell him something. I'm forgetting what. Yeah. Why my... APD, you know, we friends, class 10 classmates, we meet every Sunday. And we were discussing who's the longest in Edmunds. So I said, I'm longest for 15 years. He said, no, I'm longest. When I was a child, my father used to take me to Edmunds while he was teaching. So
I've been to your school. I went on a brief visit to Shillong with Rani and Biraj and Bikram.
Rani Mahi is my aunt.
I was taken on a tour of this.
A very sad state now. No comparison to what it was. Wooden structured building, no fences at all, except the outer fence. No fencing. It was totally different. Now and the chapel was open 24 hours. It's very sad.
And we stopped at Ransang's place on the way.
Yeah. No, you know, regarding that comment you had of possibly weaving it into their kind of work, I don't know if Leslie thought about it. I'd also been thinking that we don't want to create a situation where this becomes another load on them for their work. Then they will come even less. He has, of course, a system of giving 3 marks that the class principal of the school is allowed to write. Leslie, you can explain that? Some marking you have for the class 10?
I have practical marks for all their subjects except Assamese or Hindi, I think. That's 20 marks, those 20 marks, now it's becoming 10 marks. So I said, no, previously we used to give them all the 10 marks. The practical marks, we used to give them full marks. So I said, now if you don't attend these sessions and are not part of it, I will minus 2.5 every time you're absent. I'm sort of forcing them to join these sessions.
But that's only for class 10. Others are free. So basically, I think our idea was, it was Leslie's idea, whole thing, but I've been so involved now, it's become part of my idea also in a sense, that to broaden their minds by listening. You know, in Stephens and all, you have so many speakers coming. That's not part of the curriculum. It's not woven in, but the very act of listening to inspiring, experienced people, travel the world, seeing things, you think of things you never thought of. We were in a fantastic school, but we never had those experiences. No? So that is another reason we want them to come voluntarily, happily, and engage. Small town people, where we get a chance to think widely, we don't get. So that's why. So not too much pressure on them, but he still kept that 2.5 marks. Still, all of them don't come. So what to do?
No, I see.
It's okay, no? I mean, kids are kids now. And now they've even requested not to have it on a holiday. That's not a bad idea, actually.
No, they didn't request me. No,
you asked them.
Devika told me, it's Monday is the off day. Why are you having this session? Okay, I said, yeah, that's the point. So then I asked them. I had a session with them for something. Then most of them said, no, sir, because on the other days we have class, and after class it'll be tiring to.
Oh.
One of these, Monday we are free, so we can.
But that day when you asked in my presence, of all those who replied, only one said Monday, others said no, sir, another day. What?
No. Everybody said Monday.
Oh, everybody said Monday. Okay.
One guy said not Monday.
Oh, okay. So APD, thanks so much. Fantastic. Thank you for inspiring me to learn history.
Thank you so much, Pritam. Thank you, Leslie. All the best to all of you.
Yes.
The school, and please take care and stay safe. And hopefully, inshallah, we meet in good times.
Yeah, and Leslie, if you go to Delhi, please catch up on APD. He's a very good host.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
And he being a Maharaja, he drinks also, so alcohol, so you can enjoy the company.
That's a reason to meet him, is it?
I don't know what he's frozen again. Let him come back. We'd have to clarify this matter. What quality the Maharaja will offer. No, I was saying that Leslie is the Malayali, no? So Malayalis, the shops, the hood shops remained open all through the lockdown. It's not possible. So I was saying the Maharaja has good taste in, wine and alcohol. So, and he might be able to offer you quite good quality. I don't know how high, but.
Okay, we'll catch up then.
I live on the booze largest of my students, you see. My students, there's a thumb rule. If you're coming to meet APD, get a good bottle of scotch, yeah. And since my students are everywhere, I get it from everywhere.
Oh my God. Chalo,
bye. Thank you.
Bye, Leslie. Bye, everyone.
Bye.